Welcome back to another gathering of the Fractional Forum. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We're super excited to have you as part of the conversation today. If you're joining us again, we're also very excited to have you back in the conversation. I feel like this is kind of common with lives, people are just watching, but I just want to remind everybody that this is a very interactive conversation. So if you are watching live and you have thoughts on the conversation, you have experiences, you have insights, you have things that you would like to share. If you're a fractional, if you're a leader who's exploring fractional, all of the opinions are welcome here. So please share them in the chat. We would really love to hear what's going on for you as we go through our conversations today. And I'm actually going to let Lindsay kick it off today because our topic of conversation is about bringing accountability to the table. And I think if we were playing a drinking game based on the word accountability and you were listening to Lindsay talk, you would get quite drunk. So Lindsay, I'm gonna let you kick off the conversation today about like where should we start when we're looking at bringing accountability to the table? Let's jump right in.
All right. Well, I'm not sure I can really follow up with anything to do with the drinking game. But I mean, what I can tell you is it's a common problem. I get it all the time. I don't know about you guys, but I certainly, when I'm speaking to a leader in an organization, and they're frustrated, it often circles back to they feel as though there is a missing piece around accountability in the organization. So like right out of the gates, I always question, is it accountability, which is external to the person, right? Like we assign accountability, and we can talk about that. There's multiple ways that you can assign it or create an environment of awareness around the accountabilities. Or is it ownership? So ownership is more internal. It's like taking that accountability in a proactive way. And they're really two separate things. And a lot of leaders, they start a business, they founded it, they have ownership. And there is often individuals within an organization who naturally, own the objectives or the goals or whatever. Sorry, Tracy, I was like ill prepared to like start without a question. But I guess what I would say is like the first thing I was thinking about, how do we shift from a culture of being held accountable? That's very traditional, right? Top down, I'm the boss, I walk around and I do check-ins, I'm holding accountable, to a culture where people naturally take ownership. That, I think, is the desired outcome, but the pathway to get there is quite blurry. So maybe start there.
Well, and I think it's actually, so I did a LinkedIn post yesterday about my like walking. So I go walking in the morning, and I've had lots of conversations with people about the differing concepts between self-discipline and discipline, which again is like that external version. And when I was walking, I was like, oh, it's so easy for me to stay disciplined in this task because I feel why I'm doing it. So I'm walking, I feel the movement, I feel good, I feel adventurous, I feel whatever are those important things to me. I like feel it versus I know it. And I think that there's also that, like, similar to how you framed it in accountability as being external and ownership being internal, there's like that feeling component. But in business, we're so logical. We want to know logically where all of these things are going. And then I just want to say, like, there's this is always the accountability example I use. And I know that it's weak, but like it was something that was so prevalent for me, was that all of the leadership team is supposed to have their KPIs submitted into the spreadsheet by the end of the day, Monday, because we're going to review the spreadsheet at the management meeting on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. And so I always had my KPIs in the spreadsheet before I left the office on Monday, even if that meant I stayed late so that I could get them into the spreadsheet. And every single Tuesday at 9:59 a.m., the ops manager would be putting their KPIs into the document in the room, waiting for the meeting to begin. And the thing that always drove me nuts about that was not that the ops manager was doing it, but because the CEO said nothing. In that you said this is what was expected, but you clearly don't expect that because you're not addressing when the behavior is not followed. And so like maybe there's like that's where it breaks down. I don't know. Anyway, these are just some things that are coming up for me.
Yeah, I think the accountability piece is super interesting, but I kind of want to jump back before we dive further to that to what Lindsay said at the beginning too around the idea of ownership. And I'm curious on your opinions, but one of the things that I hear a lot of different leaders talk about that I think they get frustrated about is why don't people do the same things that I'm doing? So, someone has started a business, they feel this incredible degree of ownership, they feel this degree of pride, they're going above and beyond, and they're just I'll deliver these things at all costs. Then they start to hire their first people, and that attitude isn't replicated in the same way. And I think that there's a little bit of an elephant in the room that I think it's a little bit of a fallacy to assume that all of your employees will do the same things that you're doing, because otherwise they would literally be doing the same things that they're doing and starting their own businesses and doing that. I think that the idea that someone can feel ownership without doing the same things that the owners or like leaders are doing are kind of two different conversations. I saw you nodding your head there, Tim, so I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head here, and that's one of the first things that you have to recognize as a business owner. The rest of the team doesn't have a second mortgage on the house. They haven't put everything on the line for the business. That's there. That natural ownership that Lindsay talked about a minute ago just isn't there. It's just not going to be there. You are going to get individuals that they do care, they take ownership. So you got to create this culture because it's not going to come on its own. And I think part of what Tracy's story emphasizes is the cadence, the routine, the rhythm of checking KPIs every Tuesday morning at 10. There is an expectation that those are going to be there. They're going to be there for the rest of the leadership team to see. And you need to keep that consistent cadence and rhythm going on accountability. As soon as you take your eye off the ball, it's going to wither away into nothing.
Yeah, and I would even challenge with Tracy's example that ops leader who is doing that in the meeting, they have no ownership because they're just doing it because they're supposed to report the numbers. Have they done anything in the week leading or the time leading up to that meeting to try to impact those or change those numbers? Any conversations with their teams as a result? So are they just reporting to numbers, or do they actually care about the outcome of what's going on, right? And if we think about accountability and even responsibility, accountability is about the outcomes, whereas responsibility is really doing what you've been asked. Right? It's the task. So that person is being responsible in a way of, I have to have these things done by 9:59, and that is me checking. That's checking a box. There's no accountability in there to an outcome. If that ops leader was accountable for, successful project delivery, working towards a profitability in operations, improvement 5 to 10%, year over year, what is checking those boxes doing? I guess I would challenge.
Also, just because I want to defend this ops manager just for a minute here, because an amazing person and delivered a lot for the business. The point I make here is actually like where is this like shared understanding of this, right? Like we don't have a we, and can't remember who mentioned it, but like if the goal is for the leadership team to be able to review numbers at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, then who cares if that's submitted Monday before you leave, or if that's submitted at 9:59 on Tuesday? It doesn't matter, because it delivers on what's required, which is the accountability. So now I think this is actually a problem with like shared understanding and the language that we use when we say accountable versus responsible. Like, and have we even had those conversations as a team? From that team's perspective, I can very confidently say we did not have a team conversation about what is accountability. What does accountability look like? What does it mean for the CEO to be? What are we actually being held accountable to? If we're being held accountable to the fact that the numbers are in that spreadsheet by 10 a.m. on Tuesday, Tracy wants to be gung-ho and get them done on Monday, good for her, right? Or if that works in her process and her weekly schedule, great, right? If that works in the ops manager's schedule to do it at 9:59, like that would stress me out. But if that doesn't stress her out, that's fine, right? We all met our requirement, which was to have them submitted by this time. We were all actually being accountable, but because we set this other expectation of like should be delivered by this time, really we don't need it until 10 a.m. on Tuesday. I think there's like some loose definitions that are floating around, which then cause people to judge each other in their accountability, which is not actually helpful in the process of moving us to a more accountable, more ownership type scenario.
And I think that might be a whole other episode in itself around like the judging of each other, right? And I think that like the kind of projecting like how everyone does their work in different ways too, right? And I think that I really like what you said there, Tracy, around you know, what is the purpose of even the timing, right? If the goal is also to have everyone review those numbers and be educated on them before the 10 o'clock meeting, then the person that puts it at 9:59 is putting everyone else in a really challenging spot to even be knowledgeable on that conversation. But I think that the perception of I've done it, I do it this way, and you do it this way, is another interesting topic to unpack. To say, you know, to some degree, like why does it matter?
That's what I was going to say. Go ahead, Tim. Yes, I agree. Why does it matter?
Steve brings up that point in the comments here about why is it important? And Lindsay, you talked a second ago about just checking the box, right? So, and accountability isn't just about KPIs. I'm just going to use this as an example to kind of illustrate the point that why is this KPI important? Why am I not achieving it? Or why am I achieving it? What actions am I taking about it? There's a lot that goes around that whole conversation of accountability, not just checking a box on an item like filling out a spreadsheet and putting a KPI. Like that's not why we're doing that. That's not why we're going through the exercise of accountability. We're trying to achieve a result. And the journey to achieve that result is the conversation you have about accountability. Am I doing the things that I need to do to achieve it? Am I on track or off track? Am I making the adjustments that I have to make to achieve that result? And that's what the cadence and rhythm of accountability gives you, is a chance to have that conversation with your peers and the people that are in this together with you. So
Tracy, what about that situation that you said you bring up often? Why did it matter? So that updating and that individual in the meeting, updating their numbers like right before it's starting. Why? I guess maybe tell us a bit more about that, because clearly I kind of misread that was a lack of accountability, that person doing it last minute. But I also question that maybe there was a lack of awareness to why it mattered.
Well, okay, so like the reason I use it as an example is because what we were instructed to do was fill in the spreadsheet by the end of the day Monday. Mm-hmm. That was the instruction. And so I also will like totally agree that this is a me thing. Right? So Tracy, who at that time was very much people pleaser, if my instruction was to do this by the end of the day on Monday, then I would do it by the end of the day on Monday, because that was the expectation that was communicated to me. And then what I saw as a person who is very interested in people pleasing is another person who is not just not doing this one time because she was out of the office, and like consistently doing that. But my bigger problem wasn't with her behavior. It was with the fact that the CEO never said anything. So the CEO set the expectation. The CEO consistently let the expectation be broken. And we never had a conversation about accountability. So to me, that creates a gap. Right? There are people as part of this experience who are experiencing this as a accountability problem. It may or may not be an accountability problem, but that impacts not only the mindset between team members, but also the mindset going into this meeting. Right? And I mean, on a side note, we had a really interesting conversation at one point where we were talking about the value of meetings that we have in the week. And I had said, like, this meeting has like the smallest amount of value to me. So we put already in a spreadsheet. I look at the spreadsheet. I don't need to have an hour-long meeting to read the spreadsheet, right? Like I already know my numbers, so I don't need to read mine. And every single one of the leadership team said the same thing, except the CEO. The CEO's experience of it was that was the highest value meeting she had in a week. And I was like, let's talk about this. Because there's something happening in this meeting that's generating value for you that is not generating value for the rest of us. And we have all of the senior leadership team in this meeting on a weekly basis. It's a very expensive meeting. So how could we do something with that that's meaningful to all of the parties? And then what's the role of the spreadsheet, right? I'm not saying we can't have a central source of truth for our data, but then also it doesn't matter if it's filled in on Monday, it doesn't matter if it's filled in on Tuesday, who's looking at it when, right? Like, let's make it matter. And I think a lot of times we just have processes in place to have a process in place, but it doesn't, a process just by processing doesn't create accountability. And sometimes I also think it creates the opportunity for what I've experienced in that experience was that I think we have an accountability problem and other team members do not think we have an accountability problem, which I think is the gap.
Wouldn't it be magical if that CEO, and maybe they did, communicated to the team why that information and that meeting was so valuable? And then by creating the conversation, there would be a pass off of ownership, right? Like like maybe not a pass off, but like a shared ownership. If the individuals in the room understood why there was so much value and why those numbers were very critical for this leader, then perhaps there could have been more out of it for you, Tracy, and for the other individuals in the room. Because, and I'm going to make an assumption, that leader probably, those are, very important numbers that contribute to like some critical things.
They were very standard numbers that didn't really contribute to anything, but that's also part of the problem.
Okay. Well, let's assume that they were. Then is that leader going to walk out of the meeting and run and deal with all of those issues as a result of finding out that knowledge? But in fact, that's not empowering your team to really own what they're accountable for. So that was kind of the point I was making. It sounds like there's all sorts of things. It may be very traditional.
It was very traditional, very standard KPI reporting, right? And then I think, again, something you identify here, Lindsay, is the opportunity to use it as a chance to understand the ownership. Right? This is what we're doing. And this is one of the things I love fractional resources for, because on a day-to-day basis in any company, you just get in the rhythm of doing the things, right? And then you actually get pretty fast at doing the things. So you just do the things and you stop really critically thinking about, is this thing that I'm doing actually contributing to the ownership I feel in this task or with these KPIs? Or is it just actually creating distance? Like, now I'm just reporting these. Like, I know you're not going to do anything with them. I know that, like, I'm just going to run with it. We're also going to try and just change our KPIs if we're not hitting our KPIs, right? Like, these are other cultural things that contribute to these types of things. But when a fractional resource comes in, this is like the number one insight that they have the capacity to provide, right? Is just to look at it, especially if you're coming in for a specific use case and say, like, I'm coming in as a fractional resource to explore accountability. Right? Here's accountability from an external perspective. We also want to talk about ownership from an internal perspective. We're going to look at the things and whether or not they're delivering the results, as Tim mentioned, right? Is this delivering an ownership result? Because it might be delivering a sales result, it might also not be delivering an ownership result. Do you care, right? Like, do you care? As long as it's generating sales, is it fine, right? Like, all of these are like very culturally based parts of the conversation. And I think too important to like take the judging out of it. Like, I'm not here to judge if delivery on sales revenue is more important than ownership of the tech. Like I don't care. I'm here to identify. Right? Anyway, I feel like I've talked enough.
But I think it comes down to the goals too, right? Like, and we'll use kind of that revenue goal as well. Like, if the goal, and we'll go back to our kind of banning revenue goals, is just like grow top line revenue as furiously and aggressively as possible. Does it matter about the profit mix? Does it matter about some of the input costs or the operational costs? Like, from that person, you would hope so, right? And I think that the hope and intent is that you have leaders across the board that can kind of look across the aisle and say, okay, well, here's the other things that my decisions impact. But at the end of the day, I would also argue that it's up to the leader of that organization to see those things when they're not happening and kind of foster that conversation and collaboration across people and put the right people in the seats to be able to be accountable for the things that they can control.
And I think part of that rhythm, Tracy, and you were talking about this a little bit, is part of reviewing, are we holding each other accountable to the right things at the right time? And those things evolve, right? So you need to change that over time. And if that meeting and that example that we're beating to death is not working for some of the participants, is it just the wrong forum? Did we just default to an hour meeting when it could be 15 minutes? I've used 15-minute stand-ups daily in various different forms, but it's never been the same because the teams have been made up different. I was trying to accomplish different things, create different accountability. And so you can do that, hold it to quick, short, let's just set this up, let's check everything's good. Are there any issues? No, let's move on. We're not dealing with the issues there. That's how I got them to 15 minutes is, okay, issue, let's take that offline. But there's also some things to your point too, Keith, that you need to keep an eye on certain things. If I'm trying to drive top line revenue, I can't do it at the sake of profit. So I still need just to keep an eye on that. But unless there's an issue, let's not even talk about it, because our goal is top line revenue. We need to just know that those other ones are good. And in my daily stand-up, I had one metric. I spent zero time discussing it, but I needed my team to know that they knew their number in that area and it was under control. And so that was part of our rhythm is you tell me that number, and unless it's out of control, we're not even going to talk about it. I just need to know that you got that taken care of. Because if it builds up, then we got a problem.
So I think we should shift.
Well, we don't want to talk about Tracy's 10 o'clock Tuesday meeting the whole show.
Is Tracy's the ops leader on this call? That's my big question.
Well, you never know who's lurking on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
If you're an ops leader, give me a call. I get you. So
I do just want to say that ops leader was one of the most productive humans I've ever worked with in my life. It's
The
just a
backtracking
good
is real. The
example
backtracking is happening.
of how. Oh, but also also, I just want, like, I think it's important to recognize that we can have this experience of like accountability. And this is not about like a person being bad or a person being bad at their job or anything like that. Because I also think a lot of times we use accountability from a very aggressive point of view to say, like, if you're not accountable, you're a bad person. Like,
Yeah.
literally, whether or not those numbers were in that spreadsheet by that time was mostly irrelevant. But we like created a fake accountability problem. And I think we've talked about a lot of the ways where we can uncover those fake accountability problems so we don't have to keep banging it. But I also think that it is an important thing to not associate with like accountable versus not accountable with good and bad, because I don't think that's helpful from a let's move forward together point of view.
So one thing that go ahead, Tim, if you're I was gonna bridge into new waters.
I was just going to make sure you were, and if not, I was. So you go ahead.
Okay. So like if we go back to the expectations, I think one thing we should focus on is how, as leaders and the ability to impact organizations when we come in as fractionals, how can we set up accountability or support in setting up accountability proactively, for successful engagements, outcomes, whatever. So I just kind of want to throw that out there. I've been definitely feeling this as a fractional ops person, with, I think, kind of circle back to the beginning of what one of you guys said. I think it was Keith when you talked about, well, why don't my employees care like I care about this? So what can we do to bring to the table? What strategies can we bring to support that organization in building accountability? So like, let's reset it. Let's get it going, get on the right foot.
I think that one of the things that I've observed that can really help to create that sense of ownership around accountability is freedom to kind of pick the path of execution. So I think that if you start with option A is, I'd like you to get to X over here, and here is every single step that you take. Please execute specifically on A, B, C through all the way through Z. And here's exactly how you do each thing. That's great from a training perspective, but it isn't necessarily going to give someone complete ownership of that sequence of events. They're gonna be really good and hopefully at just going right through the sequence. I think that as you start to gain trust with that person and can start to relinquish a little bit of control around the process and give them the freedom to apply their own insights, education, experiences to that process, they're going to inherently feel a lot more ownership of that end result when it comes down to it, because they're not cooking from someone else's recipe book. They're saying, this is exactly how I want this dish to taste. And I think that was a really bad cooking analogy, but I think that the ability to be in control, I think control and accountability, in my perspective, really go hand in hand. Oh, I did it. I also have a sound issue. I'm going to change my microphone because, is this better?
We'll see. That is better. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. I got all tied up in the fish example, so I lost my train of thought.
Okay. My apologies.
I think one of the things that's really important, and I'll probably beat the, no pun intended, beat the rhythm drum to death here today when we talk about accountability, is just creating this sense and this sharing of that accountability. And I've seen this with the teams that I've led. I've seen this with other teams around me. Is there's a little bit of a wall to break through and put everybody's numbers kind of on this shared sheet and see whatever you're measuring, how many units you produced, how many calls you made, how many leads you got, whatever it is. But that in itself just creates a little bit of awareness of what's going on. And people see, oh, my number's not as good as the other ones. it can create some conversations, and you sometimes get excuses and barriers. But you really want to make sure that you create this public scorecard and conversation about accountability, because that builds this team culture of, I gotta deliver, I gotta be at this higher level, to be on the same level as others around me.
Yeah, one thing that love the scorecard, big fan of scorecards, as you know, Tim. One thing I'm realizing that's a miss thing is having roles and responsibilities tied to accountabilities or outcomes. If you think of responsibilities, those are the tasks that you're doing, right? So Tim, you talked about the activities, the phone calls, the follow-ups, but the accountability is to sell ultimately, and likely you have a goal or a KPI that you can track to. So the accountability comes from the knowledge or the agreement of the outcome, the commitment, whereas the responsibilities are more about tasks. So yes, I agree with you, Tim or Keith, 100%. If you just, this is what you're accountable, very top down, and then here's all the things you need to do to get there. Well, it's great to have an onboarding package and this is how we work as a company, set you up for success, build some confidence, some momentum, some trust. And then it's like, okay, so what are some of the tasks that you can do to start to contribute to that? Or even better yet, like have a culture where it's safe in a way to challenge that, early. Like, this is what I bring to the table. In the last organization, we did this. We were really successful with it. And what have you thought about this? I mean, I said once to a manager, I said, why don't we ever, like a fellow manager, why don't we ever hire more senior individuals into this organization? And her response was, well, the more senior, they come with a lot of bad habits. And I said, but what if we're the ones with the bad habits, right? So bringing that like perspective to the table is pretty great too, which, reinforces the ownership. So the earlier you can get to that point where that individual has the freedom and, autonomy, but backed with an accountability to certain standards or KPIs is really important, right? The outcome is the quality or, like the number, but the task or the responsibility are the things that you need to do. And I think that's one thing too, that is people overlap those words a lot.
And I think that it's really important to also just call out what, like, certain roles have different expectations of accountability and ownership. So I'll keep on my bad food analogies trend, and we talk about so if you're working at McDonald's, the idea that you have influence over how a Big Mac is made, as someone that starts your first job or you're working at McDonald's, I would say you don't have a lot of ownership over that process. And obviously you need to be accountable team members to make it in the exact order. I was about to try and do the order, but I don't know Big Macs as well as I probably should to take that on. But
2 all beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on the sesame seed bun.
Yeah, there's that.
Marketing for the way.
but like you're not going to influence how the Big Mac. However, if you're taking on that same kind of burger assembly role, it may be like a 5-star restaurant. That's a smaller staff. Maybe it's kind of known for its burgers. Like, you're gonna maybe I've really dug myself into a hole with this analogy. But, you're really going to have more control as you
get off more than you can chew.
Get to the Keith.
I've been topic. This is going to be our first ever. I'm abandoning my topic.
Okay,
you're making an important point though, which is there's some things, and like this is from a branding perspective, right? There's some things that you don't control, right? Like that's so marketing. Very rarely, I've worked for a lot of like B2B SaaS technology companies, right? Like, I don't write code. I do not control how the platform works. I can learn things from the market, make recommendations. There's like ownership that exists for you in the process, but the ownership for you isn't the entire process. So anyway, that's what I interpreted from your Big Mac example.
I love it. You know what? I'll take it. I'm just gonna. Well,
I'm gonna add something else to save it. So that 16-year-old employee could be accountable for the customer service outcome. So potentially they can't recreate the process around things, but if customer service at McDonald's is, you know, like a top priority, one of their brand promises, and that is, you know, passed on during the onboarding process, then that individual can have impact through that if that is the outcome. There's certain, again, responsibilities or tasks that they can do by, you know, like welcoming them, thanking them. Can they, you know, can I provide some help? But as an outcome from that, it's a positive customer service experience. So
it reminds me of the example Tim shared a couple episodes ago about the pens, right? Like,
yeah,
there's a whole bunch of pens out here, customer service, that don't work. We could just throw them away.
Throw the broken pens away. Wow, what a concept.
And again, like, I think a lot of times we don't give, and I don't know, maybe this is like actually, I'd love to hear how you guys think this is tied into accountability, because I think this is where, like, we allow people to see the opportunity in their role to be accountable to the larger experience of the brand. And this kind of harkens to what Scott is saying in the comments too, about how team members continuously understand their value and contributions to add to the business growth. Because I also think I've worked in a lot of organizations where I reference marketing coordinators a lot, because like marketing coordinators just post on social media. I don't care, but post every day. This is not helping them connect the dots between that activity or the responsibility to their potential accountability they could have to the team. And am I not even giving them enough? Like, I'm almost treating this role as if, like, no, this is just, I don't actually want you to be accountable towards anything. I want you to just do stuff over here. Well, that's not going to make anybody feel like they can be accountable or that they are contributing. How are we creating the opportunity for that?
I think as you move up the organization too, we can't lose sight of that your accountabilities grow. So, you know, at the front line, there's a lot of responsibilities. Pull out the racy matrix, right? Like there's, you know, you have a lot of responsibilities, but when you look at your managers and your leaders, there's a lot of accountability. So they're maybe not doing the things as often, but they're actually accountable for the things being like resulting in, I don't like to use the word production because I always say production is just doing, but producing results. Ultimately. So I think that's where we kind of get caught up too, is how do you start early, bringing those individuals into an accountability mindset versus just responsibilities, but then knowing that as you grow, you take on more accountabilities. So as we say, the buck stops at me, right? How often does that happen when you're an executive where you might have direct reports that have clear accountabilities. However, the buck stops at me. But how can you share in that accountability, you know, creating an environment where the conversations are happening around that? And I think, again, I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse or fish, is it really circles back, it really circles back to outcomes, right? Like, what are we wanting to achieve?
And we need to create that opportunity, to Scott's point, for people to understand how and what I'm doing contribute to that greater result. And I think, Tracy, it might have been you said in a few shows ago about NASA, where the janitor says, I'm helping to launch a rocket to the moon.
We're putting a man on the moon.
Putting a man on the moon, yes. And they understand how what I'm doing contributes to that larger goal. And having people that are willing to do that and able to do that creates a better organization, because I'm opening my eyes, I'm empowered, I'm accountable to things bigger than my role of keeping the floor clean. because I'm looking for some of those other things that help us get a man on the moon. Not everybody wants that. I deal with people constantly that my job is to keep this part of the floor clean, and that's all I do, and I don't give a rip about anything else. That is a decision you have to make. Is that the kind of culture that you want to have? Sometimes you just need those people in organizations, and sometimes you're trying to accomplish something bigger, and you need to change that perspective and that accountability.
And I wonder too if this, I mean, historically, traditionally, it would be that the higher up in an organization you go, the more accountability that you have. But also, how does that detract from us being able to share accountability? If the structure of the organization speaks to, hey, CEO, the buck stops here. So me as a VP is like, well, you don't seem to care about the accountability around this, so I won't care about the accountability around this. And then that just seems like a trickle-down effect that we don't really want, instead of kind of looking at it from that macro impact that the front lines can make. What might it look like? I'm not saying this is like a 5-minute transformation that you can make in an organization, but it's an interesting question to ponder in, does this structure actually enable the type of accountability we're looking for, or does the structure disable the accountability? And if so, are we even exploring what a shift in the structure might be able to do? Again, I'm not saying that if you're McDonald's, you're probably not going to be like, let's change the structure for everything we do, right? Like, no, you can't do that in like 5 minutes. But can we ask the question and see what people's experience is of that opportunity?
I want to shift to a different topic about accountability, and I want to get some perspective on some things I've learned in my past as a leader, and some things I feel I've done right, some things not so right. But I always looked at my team as a group of individuals, not a group of clones. So there are people with different career goals, there are people with different experiences, there's people with different perspectives. But I sometimes would get the comment, why am I being held to a different standard than others? And a lot of times it was me expecting more because I knew they were capable of more. And sometimes I didn't communicate that well. Sometimes maybe I didn't make it clear that I was helping to grow and develop. But I just wanted to see if there's perspectives on that comment, if others have heard the same things from their teams, and what your perspective is on that.
I think that is an interesting one, because I would also say that I am a leader that is very much, this is a group of individual people. But I also think one of the things, and maybe it's because of my personal obsession with with authenticity, but like one of the things I've always focused really heavily on is helping people see what I see in them. And so I think, while I've heard that that is a common thing amongst others, I personally haven't experienced that. And I like totally held my people to different standards based on, but it was based on also like a shared understanding. So I think I've probably referenced it on this show before, but I used to do this exercise with all of my team members called the Love Loathe list. And we did it annually. And it was like, what are the things in your job that you love? What are the things in your job that you loathe? And how can we help each other spend more time doing things that we love and less time doing things that we loathe? Without the expectation that I can get rid of 100% of the things that you loathe, because there's just some things that really none of us love to do, and we have to do. They have to get done in order for the business to tick away. And one of the things that was really, it probably took me like 6 years with a single team to get to the point where like every single person in that team was an expert at what they did. And they felt very comfortable using the team for the things they were not good at. So like a really simple example was that one of my teammates really hated doing PowerPoint presentations. And I was like, oh, I actually love doing PowerPoint presentations. And you really love to do this like technical documentation. And I really hate to do technical documentation. So how about you do technical documentation? I'll do the translating that into PowerPoints. And we both get to do more of what we love to do. And again, like to get to the point where that is like fully manifested is a continual journey. But it was like consistently part of the conversation. So that would be a thing that I would say creates the opportunity for people not to be comparing. Because I think that statement of like, why am I being held at a different a higher standard is because I'm comparing me to someone else. I'm comparing the standards set. And if we can get past the place where we're comparing the standards, then I think that gives people the opportunity to reach their greatest potential, which is what really we need in order to have the most productive team.
Yeah, I really like what Peter just said here in the comments. That I think builds exactly on what you were saying, Tracy. You know, there should be a specific set of ground rules that are kind of your non-negotiables almost across the board. These are the things that you know, are universal, right? You fill in the spreadsheet. I'm going to bring it back. You fill in the spreadsheet before 10:59. You know, on the meeting. But I think as well to what Tim was saying, like that two-way dialogue around where someone wants to go and where you see them going is really important, and being really candid in kind of both directions, I think is fundamental to being able to balance that out. And what I mean by that is that, you know, there's not too many kind of Karate Kid type scenarios where, you know, you're Mr. Miyagi and you see all this untapped potential and someone just kind of resists and pushes against it. And I think that you need to be on the same page as that team member around where they're looking to go, where they have the energy and the aspiration to get to, and how as your leader you can unlock and get them there and kind of put them on a path to getting there. And if that means that they might have bigger chunks or bigger goals, or you're holding them to a different standard, I feel like at that point, it also does layer onto the ground rules that are non-negotiables across the team. But they understand why, because you're having that kind of bi-directional conversation right up front around the things that are going to need to happen to move them to that next level.
I think I just want to reiterate, I think what Peter said. I think the standards need to stay the same, but the expectations can be different. I think that's one thing that's super important. I think it's pretty fantastic, Tim, that you do that, and also that resulted in another conversation with someone who's ready to do more. And to me, that's the victory in that, because you can walk into an organization and you can see leaders, like natural born leaders, very, very quick. It's those ones that are kind of hanging out along the wall that build up that courage to be ready to stand out into their own light, is pretty powerful. And so those one-to-one conversations, having a regular cadence of them. So, you know, not all the courage is on them to do that. And sometimes for individuals, it takes seeing someone else do it first. And I know that feels a bit, you know, backwards for a leader, but you have to start somewhere, and it's the willingness to start. So when you're looking to step in and want to take on more and start to go from like the responsibility role to more like broader accountabilities that are tied to outcomes, you know, it's awesome. And I think you as a leader, the fact that you cultivated a space that allowed for that. And then with that being said, the next question you could say to that individual is, well, what do you need from me? Right? Like, let's start talking about that as their leader. So I love that. Like, that's, to me, that's like a win-win all the way around. But yeah, just wanted to circle back to the standards. I think as a business, you want to have your standards the same, but expectations of individual roles can be a little bit more dynamic and fluid.
Peter is sharing here, lead from the middle. Some of the team need to be pushed, others need to be pulled, and some just need to know that you stand with them shoulder to shoulder. And I think, like, I want to layer onto this, Tim, because let's talk about what this looks like from a fractional point of view, because
Right.
when you're coming in as a fractional leader, it can be different by client in terms of like how you are influencing the team. You might be a direct manager in some scenarios, you might be an advisor, there's like lots of different ways that people structure fractional engagements. And so like based on your experience and your success in that arena, are there any specific pieces of advice that you would share to a fractional coming in hoping to make this kind of impact on a team?
I think that there's a key point in there, in that as a fractional, you need to have a conversation with the owner, the leader you're working with, on that potential that you see. Because as a fractional, you're going to have probably some less influence on career direction and things like that you would as a full-time leader. So you really need to carry that dialogue up as well, so that they're aware and they're seeing some of that perspective that you are, and opening their eyes to what's going on in their team. They're very busy. They got a lot going on. They got 40, 50, 60, 100, whatever employees. Some of those shining stars, they just might not see. So that would be the number one thing that I would say, is creating that dialogue up about that potential.
Lindsay or Keith, any other thoughts?
I'm out of analogies and bad stories. I feel like I'm afraid to speak at this point in time.
Can you repeat the question? I mean, I felt like I was just listening to Tim's, like response and thinking about, like great advice. Like that is, at the end of the day, they are your sponsor. They're the individual that brought you into the organization. So that partnership and that trust needs to be there 100% to have those discussions. Like there needs to be even like a weekly, with one of my fractional clients that I've been the majority of my time that goes into, we have a twice a week, 30-minute cadence. And we talk about all of that, future leaders in the business, potential risks coming down the pipeline, really anything's on the table as far as discussion. So I'm not sure if I just like added to Tim, or if, I completely answered the question.
Well, I mean, this is just a discussion. There's no completely answering the question on this show.
Just generating discussion. I think the second thing I would say too is, depending on how you structured your fractional engagement, this becomes part of how do you exit. And so you're coming in as a fractional because there's something missing from the organization. And so you're there to help with something. And so if you're there for a period of time, how does that organization better when you leave? So how you filled that hole in a permanent way. And often there's people in there that just needed a little push or a little pull, like Peter said, to come in and fill that gap and create those new cadences, rhythms, accountabilities. And that can be a key part of that exit plan, is somebody taking over those things that were missing when you came in.
Yeah, I think that is just a really important perspective for our fractional viewers, is that how most of us come in to fix a problem, but also a lot of us have leadership experience, right? So similar to what Tim spoke about, in these things that you will probably see because they're things that you're trained to look for. How are those being communicated? But also, how are those being potentially structured within your engagement? And I would say, I know last week we had someone who is very new to fractional in the chat. And so like, as you build out your engagement, you observe what happens to you in those engagements. You create that opportunity to evolve. We've used that word a couple of times today, to evolve your offering into like, this is kind of what I do. Like I come in and I end up observing like a whole bunch of these things. And then I feel really unfulfilled because I can't do anything about those things, or I don't have this kind of relationship with the CEO or those types of things. So it allows you to like continually tweak you're offering to get to legitimately like what you can do for a company that no one else can do, which also adds to your confidence in being able to talk about what you do.
Well, I think that's one angle we haven't really explored, which is from the fractional standpoint. Like, if you're someone that's exploring fractional and you're going into these organizations, how do you feel comfortable kind of feeling accountable or feeling ownership in some of these areas when you are a little bit of the outsider coming in? We've started bringing on a more kind of technology-based fractionals within Deliver Digital, and like that's one of the things that I feel like some folks struggle with as they're starting to get into that kind of new framework. They're not the CIO, they're not the director of IT, they're not on the actual ELT, but they're having to participate in a little bit of that same fashion. And so I feel like they're as fractionals having trouble getting that sense of ownership for themselves as well, because they're kind of on the periphery almost. I don't know if any of the three of you have experience or kind of advice on that front, but
I think it's really about asking good questions, being curious, like challenging perspectives. That's really why we're there, and they would be there, Keith. So whether they're on the periphery and they are advising some sort of what did you say, like IT director or someone in-house that has the accountabilities, I guess I would need to understand more. Is their accountable as the fractional IT executive, or is there accountability tied to the success of the in-house stakeholder? So I think there's so much variability in it, but yeah, what I would say is like asking a lot of good questions, and then challenging perspectives. That is what the outside perspective is supposed to bring to the table, is really like why is this the way of this organization? I mean, that's
and
a
I would
pretty
just say
broad thing.
too, I think like there is also two-pronged accountability for a fractional, right? So you have accountability for yourself and your business, right? And you have accountability in your client's business. And so like, how do you balance those two things? Because I would say like, as long as those two things feel like they're competing, that's going to be very difficult to like create an offering or a package that feels good for both parties. But if you can find a way to align the accountabilities and like, this is what I do, and this is what I do for you, right? And this is what I do in my engagements. Every engagement might look differently, but at the same time, right? Like I have to be accountable to my business development, which is like very unique to me and is not the same as the business development for the client. So I think it is important to maintain the separation between those two accountabilities, make sure you can execute on both of those accountabilities and align them as much as possible. Make it easier. Also a project and an evolution. On that note, friends, we talked about a lot of things for accountability related today. We had some great comments. So thank you, Steve and Peter and Justin, who helped us get Keith's sound sorted out. Chris for tuning in. And Scott, these conversations become more robust because you come and share your perspective. So thank you so much for doing that. We hope you continue to come. We are here every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. And we love getting into the conversation with you guys. If anybody is like specifically playing with the concept of accountability, please reach out to one of us and have a conversation about accountability, especially Lindsay. She loves to talk about accountability. She will say it a lot of times. Don't turn it into a drinking game. And it just as an opportunity to continue exploring, what does accountability mean to you? If you're just like kind of on that very last note, if you're new to the fractional game and you want to have a conversation with another fractional resource that just maybe had more evolution into aligning their accountability with their clients' accountability, reach out to one of us. We would be super happy to have a conversation. I know we're at time, but I want to officially state this. So our friend Carolyn has been pulled into a full-time fractional contract that is currently not allowing her to be part of the Fractional Forum. And so we are going to have some new CFO insights who are going to be popping in on the next few episodes. If you or someone you know, or if you are not a fractional CFO, but another fractional who is interested in getting into the conversation, please reach out to one of us. We are putting together our a structure for that, so we can get some additional voices into the conversation. And if you have been one of those people who has been in the chat with us on an ongoing basis, we really would love to hear your actual voice in the conversation. So reach out. I think we have a guest thing on the website. Is that right, Lindsay? Be a guest? Or maybe
Could
not.
be. Yeah.
We might have something on the website about being a guest on the show.
I mean, there's definitely an opportunity to submit a request to get in a discussion. So I'm not sure that it is defined like a guest or anything like that, but definitely reach out. Someone will respond.
Reach out to one of us,
yes,
even just on LinkedIn, and we will get back to you. So thank you.